Hi, I'm Dawson, and unfortunately, I'm human. That's right, ladies, gentlemen, chefs, and all others watching. You're looking at a 100% human boy child. And I don't mean that in the Zuckerberg way. For reals. I'm 100% human. Ancestry.com says so. After the release of Disney Plus's X-Men 97, I'm starting to wish I was less human and more mutant, like Wolverine or the Zuckster. X-Men 97 is a reboot of X-Men the Animated Series, which was a animated TV show in the 90s, and it's very beloved amongst the comic book community. In fact, this is some people's favorite adaptation of the X-Men overall, and I gotta be honest, I can kind of see that argument, especially with these newer episodes. X-Men the Animated Series had a 65 episode run plan. It carried out all the episodes it wanted to, had 5 seasons, and it never was actually canceled. But the way that it ended left fans wanting more. The show actually ended with Charles Xavier, the leader of the X-Men, having to leave his team behind to heal a fatal wound that could only be cured in another planet. And the X-Men were, for the first time, without their leader and father figure, Charles Xavier. Because of this ending, fans wanted more. They wanted to see what happened to the X-Men without Charles Xavier. And it stayed that way, that unknowing, for about 30 years. That brings us to this year, 2024, with the release of X-Men 97. This is a continuation of the beloved series, and it picks up directly where the other one left off, with the X-Men without Charles Xavier trying to find their way in this new world that Charles has helped to be more tolerant of mutants, but at the same time isn't there to guide them. With the third of the X-Men 97 episodes released, I thought I'd give you my thoughts so far on the series. However, I will warn you, there will be spoilers for the plots and specific things that happen in each episode so far, so if you don't want any spoilers, I would advise not watching this. You have been warned. So without further ado, here's my review of X-Men 97, episodes 1 through 3. The first episode serves as an introduction for the team that we know and love, and this series' new updated roster. Our X-Men...
My X-Men!
Sorry, Cyclops, you're right. His X-Men consist of Wolverine, Gambit, Bishop, Rogue, Storm, Beast, Jean Grey, Cyclops, Morph, and Jubilee. This episode does a really good job of showing a new dynamic in the team without Charles Xavier. It especially has a really good arc for Scott Summers as Cyclops, as we see the pressure that has fallen upon him as the new leader of the team, how he has to kind of step into Charles's role, and he doesn't really know what he's doing, but he knows that he needs to continue Charles' mission. This episode also gives us a lot of really cool X-Men fight scenes. There's an awesome moment with Wolverine and Gambit, and these fight scenes are never a bad thing. They're always cool to watch, so I'm glad that we got some of these in this episode. One thing I will say is this episode tries to fit a lot into its somewhat shorter runtime. They try to do so much. There's, I want to say, 2 or 3 big fight scenes. There's this arc I said with Cyclops trying to come into his own as a leader. Jean Grey is pregnant and wants to leave the X-Men. There's some pressure within the X-Men themselves revolting against Cyclops as their leader. There's just so much going on, and I think it would have really benefited from a longer runtime. And I'm hoping that we get longer runtimes in episodes in the future because it'll really give them time to flesh out the actual storylines. Because of how much it tries to fit in and it just being the first episode, I think this is, in my opinion, by far the weakest of the 3 that have been released. Not to say it's bad, but it's just not better than the other 2. This episode does, however, leave us with a really cool cliffhanger. One of the best I've seen in animated television, maybe in a long time. It leaves us with Magneto, the arch nemesis of the X-Men, in Xavier's mansion, and he reveals to them that in Charles Xavier's will and testament, he left the X-Men to Magneto.
Everything he fought for now belongs to me, my X-Men.
Magneto is now their actual leader, and they're going to have to work hand in hand to fulfill Charles's dream. Enemies and enemies working together to help their one mutual friend. Seeing Magneto forced to work with the X-Men, someone that he has openly despised for a long time, to honor his best friend's legacy is a really, really cool idea. I'm very excited to see how this plays out, and watching this, I needed to watch the next episode because I was very excited to see their dynamics. Overall, I'd rate this episode a 6 out of 10, but I'm going to bump it up to a 7 just because of that Magneto ending. Episode 2 is really where the show found its footing, in my opinion. I think it did a really good job of establishing how this dynamic is going to work for the rest of the series. Magneto is trying to earn the trust of the X-Men, and they obviously can't trust him, and there's a lot of tension there. But Magneto also has come out of hiding for the first time in a while, so the US government actually has a warrant for his arrest. And in an effort to make the other X-Men trust him, he agrees to a trial with the government. Things start to go wrong at the trial when a bunch of anti-mutant protesters and a guy called the Executioner show up and start doing some real damage and harm. So the X-Men are forced to stop them and protect those in the courthouse, and Magneto, in fact, actually does protect people in the courthouse, which gives him a pardon. Now, he does do some shady blackmail type stuff that isn't within the laws, but it's exactly how you would expect Magneto to handle the situation, and it's cool to kind of see him using these shady, darker methods than the X-Men would, but still for good. I think that's a really cool spin on the character, and it's good growth. I would say that's probably the best part of this episode, is the growth that Magneto experiences. We've seen him as a bad guy in almost everything, and we've seen his bond with Xavier. No matter what odds they're at with each other, they always can sit down and play a game of chess with each other, because in their hearts they are still best friends. But now we get to really see what Magneto will be like without Xavier, and we can see that Xavier has kind of influenced him, and he is trying to do good, and that's a really cool growth. Even though he still has his darker tendencies, he's trying to do good with them. And at the end of the episode, we even get to see the X-Men begin to trust him a little bit more. So overall, I think this has growth for everybody, and that's my favorite thing in stories. I think the most important element is growth, and I'd have to give this episode an 8 out of 10 because of that. I begun episode 3 a little wary because the plot of this episode is another clone plot. This may not be familiar to those of you who aren't comic book readers, but they tend to use clones a lot in comic books, and it never really goes well. For example, the Clone Saga in Spider-Man famously introduced a clone of Peter Parker called Ben Reilly, and it just got really confusing. He ended up becoming the Scarlet Spider, which is a cool character, but it just didn't make sense. I don't know. I personally didn't like that storyline. This episode reveals to us that the Jean Grey that has been with the X-Men throughout this series, and possibly most of the animated series before it, actually isn't the real Jean Grey. She's a clone, and they find this out when the real Jean Grey shows up on their doorstep asking for help and collapses. Jean Grey's clone obviously has a hard time dealing with this and doesn't think that she's the clone. She has all the memories of Jean Grey. She has his life with Scott. She has a new child that she gave birth to in the last episode, and it kind of breaks her mind. And then she realizes that she is actually the clone when the villain of this episode, Mr. Sinister, shows up and takes control of her. So Mr. Sinister is a famous X-Men villain and rumored to be the villain of the X-Men MCU movies. He's a 19th century mad scientist who experimented on mutants to extend his own life and give himself powers. In this episode, he wants to take Jean Grey's clone, Madeline is what they call her. He wants to take Madeline's son with Cyclops, Nathan, and turn him into the perfect mutant, essentially, by experimenting him and harming him. Once Mr. Sinister takes control of Madeline, Xavier's mansion becomes sort of a horror house. He uses Madeline's powers to absolutely wreck the mutants and give them all sorts of hallucinations. I thought this sequence was super cool. It was my favorite sequence in the episode by far. There's just so much cool animation here. There's a lot of really disturbing images. They play off the X-Men's fears a lot, which I really enjoy. We don't get to see a lot of what frightens X-Men, especially characters like Wolverine, and we got to see them fight a lot of really cool random monsters that were all designed super well. This episode definitely had the darkest tone out of the three, and it was kind of scary. It was a disturbing episode, and I thought that was awesome. There's a moment where Mr. Sinister talks to Madeline through a baby monitor, and that was terrifying. I thought that was really cool. I loved the distortion on the voice for that. That was a very, almost Exorcist poltergeist type moment. The way this episode handles clones actually isn't bad in my opinion. I think they do a really good job of keeping it up in the air for the viewer and the characters. Neither Madeline nor Jean Grey know when they were swapped out for each other, so they could be basically interchangeable, and it leaves it up to the viewer to kind of believe and keep that mystery alive for what they think happened. I was really impressed by the animation overall in this episode. It was really, really great. The animation was so good. I loved the animation this episode. It was really great. I think my favorite part of this episode had to be the animation. But no, seriously, this episode, it had a lot of great design for monsters and characters, and I thought it worked really well. Especially in one particular scene where Madeline actually has Mr. Sinister's control broken by the real Jean Grey. Jean Grey goes into Madeline's mind, and it is revealed that most of Madeline's memories transferred from Jean Grey are her pain. She gets the origin of Jean Grey, that pain. She gets all the pain that Jean Grey has carried through her, with none of the actual good memories. That's all she remembers is the pain, and that's why she's able to be controlled by Mr. Sinister in this way, because he only focused on the pain. So Jean Grey goes in, and she shows her that there's more to life than just her pain. There's also her love, like her love for Scott and her love for her child. So she goes to the moment where Nathan is born, which is one thing that we can confidently say was Madeline's and not Jean Grey. So she goes to the one thing that's truly hers and shows her all this pain that she endured during labor, but also all the love she felt. And she's able to, through that, transfer this pain that Madeline feels into love for her child, and ends up breaking Madeline free, and her and Scott get to go save Nathan. However, Nathan has been infected by a virus by Mr. Sinister, and the only way to save him is to send him to the future where he can be cured. In this moment, Cyclops and Madeline have to say bye to their child, who is maybe 3 days old at this point, and it's super sad. Cyclops has father issues himself and does not want to abandon his child like his father did with him, and it makes for a really sad moment. I'd like to start a new segment on this show where I talk about my favorite shot in a movie or TV show, or my favorite scene, and this is my favorite in this episode, the way that it's framed. They show Nathan's reflection in Cyclops' visor, and it's a really good way of showing emotion, because emotion is usually captured through the eyes on film, and you can't do that with Cyclops because his eyes are blocked by the visor. So by doing this, we can show how much Nathan means to him and how he's really the center of Scott's thoughts by reflecting him through the visor, which is the window to Scott's eyes, and through it, his emotions. To end on a bit of a lighter note on this episode, don't worry too much about Nathan, their child. He actually, in the future, becomes a character known as Cable. He was in Deadpool 2. He becomes a really cool assassin bounty hunter from the future who can travel through time. And he does reunite with his parents again, but just right now, they can't see him and be with him. All in all, I'd give this episode an 8.5 out of 10. It was my favorite out of the three because of all the emotions tied into it, along with just some cool and funny character moments and really cool monster designs. In conclusion, this show is a really great addition to Disney+. I would definitely say it's their best animated show so far. As someone who wasn't a really big fan of What If, I was worried about how this was going to work, but I really enjoy this. I've always been a semi-regular fan of X-Men content. I think this might be my favorite just because of the nostalgia to it. It brings us back to those zany character designs, the bright colors, the funny catchphrases, like all the stuff that we love about early comics. It really brings us to that era and continues to tell stories in that timeline that I think is really, really fun. The only negatives I would say of this show is the runtimes. I don't think there's enough. I think I would love more of it. I want it to last longer, and I hope that we get some longer episodes in the future. I know there's some part 1s and part 2s coming up, and I think that will really help solve their issue. It'll give them more time to tell the stories they want to. Alright, that's all I wrote for this episode. I will see you guys later. Let me know what else you want me to review, comment on, give my opinion on, and I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching.